We have the privilege on these months that have 5 Sundays in them. We've dedicated that 5th Sunday to being not just a movie day for the kids, but also to being our missions moment, or our points in time where we can get caught up on what we do and who we're sponsoring and who we're supporting and who we're praying for as far as our home workers go, our global workers, our in Canada workers, all of our workers who we support. And if you haven't noticed on the back bulletin board, we've got all kinds of stuff out there. But I want to introduce to you this morning Reverend John Stewart from ERDO, the Emergency Relief and Development Overseas. This is the PAOC kind of version of World Vision, if I can say it that way, but you can clarify that. Thank you, because he's going to clarify that for me when he gets up here. John, come on up. And he's wired, so I don't even have to give up the microphone. But we're not team preaching. We did team announcements, but we're not team preaching. Okay. You are welcome so the movie ends at 12 o'clock. Okay. Just so you know, there's a big clock back there. 1:30, yeah. That's going to be a lot of dodgeball.
I live in Kitchener, and so I made my way to a friend's house last night in Pickering, stayed overnight, and then made my way today. It's great to be here, and I've got a day of meetings starting in Wellington. If you know where Wellington is, that's where I'm starting tomorrow morning, and so staying over in Brighton at a friend's house as well. Glad to be here. I was thankful to meet with your pastor probably 4 months ago, and we had breakfast together and chatted about ERDO. And I do represent ERDO. Now, you had the card and you had the information, so you got it right. How many of you would be here today and you'd say, Pastor John, I know all about ERDO. You don't have to tell me a thing. How many would say that's you? I know all about. Great. There's one person that's saved in the house. That's great. How many of you would say, I know a little bit about ERDO. I think I know about ERDO. I can kind of answer some of the questions. Yeah. How many of you would say, I have no sweet clue what ERDO is? Well, that's good. That's what we're going to have an altar call right now. And I see that hand. Is there another? If you came with the bus will wait. But anyway, glad that you're with me today. And I'm happy it's my first time. I went to Bible college in Peterborough. It's my first time in this church here in Millbrook. And I should tell you, we've got some mutual connections. If you've been part of this church for a long time. How many have been at Millbrook for a long time? This has been your home church for a long time. Okay. So Jamie Nelder, Pastor Jamie Nelder, was one of my close friends at Manitoulin. Our cottages are right next to each other. I was talking to Sean today, and Sean has been to the cottage, and so I've maybe seen Sean even at the cottage. It's great to see familiar faces, isn't it, today? Sean, how many of you are looking forward to Christmas? Do any of you have family around that are our family not around that you'll see again at Christmas or sometime special? How many are looking forward to it? Isn't that a great... I have 2 kids. One of them lives in Edmonton area, and one of them lives in South Dakota. And I never see them. So I look forward to opportunities when we can connect. It's nice to see familiar faces, isn't it? It's always nice to see familiar faces. Well, maybe not always. Tony Campolo tells the story of one day on a rainy day, he was about to go to his office, and he went to look in the cloakroom in his house for an umbrella, and there were none. So he walked down to the bus station, took the bus to the subway, walked down the stairs, was walking across the platform at the subway, and jumped on his subway, read his paper, and when they announced his stop at the subway, he reached over without thinking and grabbed the umbrella of the woman beside him. And she said, young man, that's my umbrella. And he apologized profusely, and he went on his way. At the end of the day, his wife had called his administrative assistant, and she said, can you please tell Tony to bring home all the umbrellas he's left? So Tony went to his closet at work, and sure enough, there were 4 umbrellas that Tony grabbed. And so he walked with these 4 umbrellas under his arm, over to the subway, down the steps, and he was walking across the platform of the subway when he ran into a familiar face. He ran into the woman whose umbrella he had tried to steal in the morning. And she looked at him with his 4 umbrellas, and he looked at her, and she said, well, you've had a good day of it, haven't you? So see, it's not always good to see familiar faces. But anyway, today it is, and I wish that Pastor Jamie was here. I actually texted Jamie today and said, listen, I'm in Millbrook. Should I mention your name, or will they not let me speak if I do? He didn't get back to me yet, so I don't know what that was. Anyway, for those of you that do not know what Erdo is, and even if you do know a little bit, let me give you a little bit. I would call it maybe an infomercial about Erdo, and then at the end I'll complete my time with you with a devotional on the feeding of the 5,000. That sound okay? And we'll be out here by 1:30, no problem at all. I think for us to understand about what Erdo does, it's important to look where it started. How many of you are old enough to remember 1983, there was a severe famine in Ethiopia? And the television images of the children with distended stomachs was horrific. The world took notice. Bob Geldof got a bunch of rocker friends together in the UK and Europe, and they produced a song, Do They Know It's Christmas Time at All? And for somebody who gives me $10,000 to Erdo today, I'll sing the whole song. But anyway, he wrote that song for Erdo. No, it's not for Erdo. He wrote that song for the famine in Ethiopia. And that's the same time, that's the origins of Erdo. We began in 1983. We've always been humanitarian as an organization. But in 1983, when that famine hit, we said, you know what, we've got to do something more. And we began as an organization. So what does that make it? I've got the number. It's 40 years for Erdo this year. Isn't that fantastic? 40 years, been doing great. So let me talk to you a little bit briefly about the mission and the vision. They're kind of interwoven, but the mission of Erdo is to passionately respond to the practical needs of people living in poverty and crisis around the world. So we want to respond. Erdo has always been responding to the crises and people in need around the world. The vision is that we would seek Christ-motivated community and individual transformation by meeting basic human needs and fostering social, economic, and spiritual potential. See, I was talking to somebody in the foyer today, and they said, do you still have the spiritual component? I heard you say you're humanitarian, but do you still do the spiritual component? And absolutely we do. But I would say that the premise of Erdo is based on this. That people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. And when their stomach is growling so loudly, and you're trying to preach to them when they're starving literally to death, it's hard for them to think of anything else but that next meal that's coming their way. And Erdo says we're going to meet those needs, which will build a pathway for people to experience Jesus Christ. Let me talk to you quickly about three foci, I guess you'd say officially, of the areas of care that Erdo. I call it three legs of the Erdo stool. There's crisis response. There is child care plus sponsorship and community development. So let me first of all talk about crisis response. The first phase and how we started in '83 was responding to that drought in that famine in Ethiopia. And we continue to do the same things. Right now, you know that there's a war raging for some reason still a year and a half later in Ukraine. We have a war going on that needs to stop. We're meeting the needs. I've got people on there. I don't have them. Erdo has connections with pastors, with missionaries who are on the ground meeting the needs of people who have been taken out of their home. Their places have been destroyed. There was an earthquake in Turkey in February where multiple tens of thousands of people lost their lives. The beauty of Erdo, and you mentioned another, I'm not going to mention World Vision or Compassion, I won't mention them by name, but you mentioned some other incredibly great organizations that are doing good things. The wonderful difference about Erdo is that every single project that we're involved in at Erdo, for example, when we're supporting somebody in Ukraine, we have somebody on the ground that's either one of our Pentecostal Assemblies of Canada global workers. The projects are all facilitated and administrated by our global workers ourselves. If we don't have a missionary, which is beautiful because 4 weeks ago or so, and I don't know exactly the date, there was an earthquake in Morocco. You heard about it. That was a Friday night that happened. I got a message on Monday from Erdo that said when people want to give towards Morocco, here is how we do it. 3 or 4 days later, we're able to get the money to the need. Isn't that incredible? Sorry. So the beauty of Erdo is that we have people on the ground. If they're not specifically our global workers, we have 33 international partners whose heartbeat is the same as ours to meet the needs of those that need. And we will get the money to them. So there's great accountability in that. I know, you mentioned World Vision, and that's a great organization. My sister was one of the Canadian directors for years. There's a lot of good work being done. The Pentecostal Assemblies of Canada, which is your denomination, this is our family ministry, Erdo is. All of our family members are the one administrating. It's a wonderful operation. The second thing I want to talk about today is community development with you. Community development. It offers long-term solutions to provide the building blocks needed for community, for self-sufficiency for the people that we're ministering to. By equipping those that we serve, their dignity and personal initiative is preserved. Erdo community development projects range from agricultural and livestock problems to clean water initiatives, microfinance loans. Let me explain that just for a second. And probably some of you know, I don't mean to explain it, but let me share about that a little bit. There are women, we have a project right now that we're involved in called the 365 Project. And the 365 Project simply means that we are ministering to women's needs 365 days a year. Now, if you're married, you may say, that's what I'm doing too. But it's a little different. It's a little different. What I'm talking about, in Canada, we've got a issue between the sexes, right? Like, we have a problem in that we don't pay women equally a lot of times, and that is a problem. Don't get me wrong, that's a problem. We need to be. It's craziness that in 2023 that's not happening. But in third world countries, the inequity between men and women is much different. In third world countries, when economics are tight and when money is tight, women are sold into slavery. Children are sold into slavery. And so the 365 Project says, we're going to do our best working with our missionaries, but also partners to rescue women that have been captured in that. And the microloan comes here into play this way. We'll try to train them and set them up so they can give them a loan so they can set up a shop and be able to sell their crafts or sell their products or whatever in order to escape that lifestyle. We want to facilitate that, and that's community development. Vocational training, employment skills, healthcare initiatives. One thing I want to say is this, that Erdo is focused on church-based community transformation. You say, what does that mean? The core of it is this. Our strategy at Erdo is to build strong and resilient communities. And so we'll layer initiatives. For example, I'm going to talk about child sponsorship in just a moment, but for example, with child sponsorship, where we've got initiatives where we're sponsoring children in an area, we'll often work with the local church in the same area, and we'll provide for them bore wells that we'll dig, or carbon filters that will produce water that maybe nowhere else in that area there is good water. And so the church will be the one to provide water for the community. And how many know that draws people in? Those community people that don't know Christ say, we're going to go to the church. Those people have got it going on. We're going to find out what it's all about. And so we believe at Erdo that we want to make that happen. We want to teach the communities around this, the church that's empowering them to be more self-sufficient. Finally, we're involved in child care sponsorship. I had some people this morning say, I sponsor a child with Child Care Plus, and I'm so thankful that you do. The rest of you that would like to get saved, let's talk after the service. But I want to talk about Child Care Plus just for a second. The Child Care Plus programs are for children between the ages of 0 and 18. They are children living in communities suffering the effects of extreme poverty. I have a short video. It's a 3 or 4 minute video about Child Care Plus. Can you take a look at the screens right now, and we'll come back after that.
Today we're in Scienceduck Village, which is a village with over 10,000 families, and we are in village number 5, which has 20,000 families in this tiny little area. I am global worker Tiffany Rowley here in Phnom Penh, Cambodia. Here in Cambodia, my main role is Child Care Plus, and we have 13 different CCP communities throughout the country in 7 different provinces. And what that looks like is you as a sponsor would sponsor a child for $41 a month through Child Care Plus, And that provides education, school supplies, school uniforms, a nutritional supplement each month, medical care, and all the way through to post-secondary college or a trade. And so those are all the things that my office take care of here in Cambodia. The communities that we work with here in Cambodia range from rural poverty to urban poverty. And so we have a big dynamic amongst the children and the families that we work with. And in this community in particular, which is where we are today in Sign Sup, the communities here do not have access to their own land. They have no land rights. Water and sanitation is very difficult. Some have it, some don't. And so we are working directly with those families, not just to alleviate some of the physical aspects that they are walking through, but to bring holistic development to who they are in Christ as well. The chiefs and the elders of these communities are coming to us and they're wanting more kids in the program. And it's because they see that the families of CCP are different than the families in their surrounding areas. And I'm happy to say that that is because of a transformed life, because of the gospel. When you sponsor a child, you're actually able to stop not only the cycle of poverty through education, but through the family dynamics. You are able to stop human trafficking. When a mom comes to know the Lord, the value of life changes for that family. She will no longer allow her kids to be put in vulnerable situations. She will no longer allow them to be sold for sex. The dad, when he comes to know the Lord, all of a sudden has a value for his wife and his children. And so child sponsorship is essentially ending the cycle of abuse in various forms here in Cambodia. We're right at the very cusp of having our CCP kids graduate grade 12, go to post-secondary, go to university. And already, even though they're in their university studies, they are giving back to their community through teaching English and music in the church or in the community center. And they have a desire to see the families in their communities where they once were to also be changed as they are being changed. To those of you who've sponsored kids currently and in the past through Child Care Plus, I want to say a huge thank you. Your investment is for the children of tomorrow. These kids are growing up knowing the Lord and wanting their nation to be changed, not just for Him, but in the physical sense as well. They are not satisfied to have the Cambodia that they grew up with be the Cambodia of tomorrow, and they desire change, and that is what's going to happen.
So I need to say something that gets me every time I watch that video. She says some words on that video that, you know, when I first heard them, I didn't totally understand them until I listened carefully. She says a thing about when a mother gets saved, she no longer lets her children be put in vulnerable situations. You know what I thought when I heard that the first time before I heard the rest of it? I thought, okay, so they're using car seats now. Kids aren't in vulnerable situations anymore. But then the next thing she says is, when a mother's saved, she won't let her child be sold for sex. Like in Millbrook, on Sunday, October 29th, that doesn't sit well with me, and I'm sure it doesn't sit well with you. That is their reality. Some of you have partnered with us, and sometimes churches sponsor a child all by themselves as a church. I want to thank you that have been involved in that. Child Care Plus is making a difference. Anyway, before I move on to the other part, the preaching part of my sermon today, I want to say thank you to you. You know, even though not all of you know everything there is to know about Urdo, even though you don't all know every detail of what it's about, your church has contributed to Urdo over the years, up to about $4,000 that you've given towards Urdo. And a lot of times that's been towards, we'll send appeals for crises like Ukraine or Morocco or Turkey or whatever the situation is. And a lot of churches will take an offering and respond. You've done that. And I just want to say thank you. Thank you for doing that. I'll take my Urdo hat off just for a moment if I can. I'd like to share from the biblical account of the feeding of the $5,000. How many of you, as you're looking, and I'm not going to have you turn to any specific book, I'm going to synthesize all of the accounts because it's found in all four Gospels. I'm going to bring them all together today. How many of you this morning when you got up, one of the first things you did, you thought, I need a coffee? How many of you would say, I need a coffee this morning? Okay, so that's good. I was the same way. I mean, I know, how many of you know what a caffeine headache is all about if you don't get a coffee? Yeah, The rest of us, I'm with you, and the rest of you are not addicted to stuff, and I appreciate that. What about if you get to supper time and you maybe haven't had enough to eat, and you're starting to get a little bit hangry, as they say? Do you know what that's about? Wives, stop looking at your husbands right now, please. That's not fair. Your blood sugar's low, you get a little bit off. And we use the words, and I use the words, I'm starving. I'm starving. And when I'm starving, what do? I'll often go over to my fridge, and I've got 2 doors that open. I'll open the doors, and the fridge is full, right? But what do I say? I've got nothing to eat. You know what, friends? That's how it works here in North America, but it's not like that in so much of the world. You know, we do something interesting in Canada and North America, the Western world, that really doesn't fly in these countries with poverty. You know, when we get to wintertime, January 1st hits, and what do we make on January 1st? New Year's resolutions. And what is something that is on everybody's New Year's resolution? I'm going to lose weight. Basically, I'm going to starve myself right now in the coldest part of the year. That's what we think, right? I wrote one year, I think you've probably seen it on Facebook, I put, on January 1st, today I got rid of all the food that's not good for me that was in our house. And then I said, it was delicious. But in North America, we're going into the harshest weather possible, cold. In no other part of the world where people are starving to death would they say, you know what, the weather is really tough today, so I'm just not going to eat. They wouldn't understand that. We live in a world that is not congruent with so much of the rest of the world. And you know what? We live in a world that is not like the world that Jesus was ministering with. Jesus entered the wilderness for 40 days and 40 nights. He fasted, and he experienced severe poverty. It's no wonder when Jesus was teaching his disciples and teaching us how to pray, he said, give us this day. Yeah. That was his worldview. That was his worldview, the experience of many in his day that they needed bread for that day. But friends, we don't pray that way anymore, do we? Today I came to town early and I was telling somebody in the foyer that I thought I'll get there early and I'll maybe grab a Tim Hortons. I didn't know, I've never been to... Stop laughing at me. That wasn't even a laughing with me. That was a laughing at me. So I found an open Subway, and you know, it's world-renowned coffee at Subway. But there were like 15 people in line. I didn't even have time to wait for the lackluster coffee at Starbucks, or at Subway, I mean. I told my wife that story too, and she goes, you didn't want to drive around town looking for a Starbucks? And anyway. But I say this with Panera Bread, with Cobb Bread, with Subway. We don't understand daily bread. Like who of you actually prays for food to eat daily? God, give me my daily bread. We've got our daily bread, don't we? But in Jesus' day and age, it was different. I want to start by encouraging you this morning that we need to join in God's mission. Join in God's mission. Do you know that of all the different miracles that took place, 2 of them are included in all 4 of the Gospels? And one of them is the feeding of the 5,000. But there are different reasons and nuances to the story. I'll tell you what I mean. For example, Matthew and Mark offer separate and different reasons for why Jesus and his disciples were headed to the wilderness. Matthew's gospel reports that they had just received the news that John the Baptist had been beheaded. And they were overcome with grief and a sense of loss, and their sadness drove them to find a solitary place. You can relate to that, can't you? You go through a time of difficulty. As much as we love community, we want to be on our own. We want to be quiet, don't we? In Mark's account, we see a different reason. So many people were coming to Jesus and his disciples for ministry that it got overwhelming. They were busy. And Jesus said, come away with me. Let's get away. Let's go away and we'll get some time on our own. And I think you can relate to that as well. Being so busy that how many have to be talked into going for a holiday? Maybe not all of us, but the disciples didn't need that either. So when they got there and they had that solitude for the short period of time, But all of a sudden it was interrupted by what? By 5,000 men, and by 5,000 at least women and children as well. Jesus was not annoyed by the interruption, but rather he responded to them with compassion. As you read the various accounts, you'll read that before he fed the crowd, Jesus healed the sick, and that he taught them about the kingdom, that they were like lost sheep without a shepherd, lost, scared, vulnerable. What great news when he told them they could be part of the kingdom. See, they were living in between two political powers that looked down upon them and despised them and were hard on them. And what great news it would have been for them to know that they could be part of the kingdom of God, not because they had great wealth or power, but simply because they wanted to be part of a kingdom. But the day started getting away, and it wasn't like today with the street lights coming on at 7 o'clock when it gets dark and we could see. There were no lights after the sun went down. And so the disciples got worried about these people not being able to find food. So Matthew, Mark, and Luke say the disciples acted out of concern for the people when they approached Jesus and said, let's send them to find food. But Jesus said, no, you feed them. You feed them. In John's account, it was Jesus that initiated the conversation about food. He said to Philip, where shall we buy bread for all these people to eat? I would suggest Subway, but that wasn't an option there. And John provides a little side note. He says, Jesus already knew what he was going to do. He asked this to test him. He knew what he was going to do. The disciple Philip answered Jesus, 8 months' wages would not buy enough food for each one to have a bite. Friends, I want you to not miss something. Jesus asked a question at one level, and Philip answered it at another level. Pastor, author, seminary professor Mark Buchanan says of this exchange that Jesus was asking a where question. Where can we get food? But Philip answered with a how. How are we ever going to get that done? Jesus was asking a faith question. Philip answers with logistics. Friends, I wonder how many of us respond to Christ's invitation to partner with them in the same way, where we say things like, oh, the need is too great. The little bit of savings I have won't be enough to make any difference at all. Friends, that's the how answer, even though God is asking us the where question. When we answer things like, how are we going to pay for this? How are we going to get volunteers for that position? How are we going to find the right facility? How can we start that new ministry that's so labor intensive? We don't have enough people to do it. Friends, when we're obsessing over the how, we erroneously assume that God doesn't have the means to meet the need. And God already knows what he wants to do. He's looking for someone to just say, okay. He's testing us. Friends, in order to partner with God, we need to be willing to join him in the mission. Second thing I want to encourage you today about is to be willing to give whatever you have. We need to give whatever we have. Jesus asked the where question, and you know what? There's one kid in the whole crowd that says, I can help. Ironically, Andrew still wants to bicker over it. How is this little bit of food going to do anything? But Jesus was not interested in that conversation. He had what he needed. He had one boy willing to step forward to make a sacrifice for what he has for the sake of what Jesus was up to. Friends, I tell you today that Jesus just needs one person to say yes and start sacrificing toward it for him to meet his kingdom needs. Now, you can tell by looking at me, that I don't mind eating. And I'll be honest with you. If I was in a crowd of 10,000 people and I was the only person with enough foresight to pack a lunch, when Jesus asked for my food, I would have come up with a reason why it wasn't going to happen. You know, Jesus would love to share, but my mom is calling me. I need to walk the llama. I've got to go home now, and so I can do some of that. But the boy didn't do that. He didn't make an excuse. With one boy's willingness, the kingdom began to break out. And the crowd got to see a visual demonstration of what Jesus had been teaching them about. Friends, God's kingdom needs two things. Someone to say, I'll sacrifice what I have. And then it needs people to say, okay, I'm all in on this. I'm going to serve. Finally, today, I urge you this, friends. Say yes to God. say yes to God, when the kingdom can go forward, when people begin to say yes to God, not making excuses, not reducing the kingdom of God to our strategy, to our capacity, to our resources, but just saying yes to God. As impractical as a thing may seem, we find that three things happen, just like happened in this story. First, everybody got what they wanted. The Bible story tells us that everybody got as much food as they needed. Secondly, none of it got wasted. That's part of the story. Thirdly, there was more than that. They collected 12 basketfuls. That's a great lesson for us. But I want you to know the opposite is also true. Whenever people evade the mission of God, you'll be chronically dissatisfied. You'll waste a lot, and you'll never have enough for everyone to go around. So my question to you today, just in the last 12 minutes that I have, about meeting the missional needs of the kingdom is this: what mentality will you take? I believe that Jesus Christ is looking for his followers to partner with him in a greater way than we ever have before. Because I honestly don't believe that for this church, for the church I attend, for our denomination, for evangelical churches nationwide and worldwide, I don't think we can imagine the scope of all the things that God has in mind to do. You know, there's a song that maybe you've sung here in the past: greater things are yet to come, greater things are still to become in the city. And I want you to know, I believe that for your church. Greater things than you've ever known are here to occur in Millbrook, and you're going to be part of that process as you partner with God. But I want to encourage you to start answering the questions God asks. When God asks you a where question, let me urge you not to reduce it to a how answer, because otherwise you'll miss out on all that God wants to accomplish it. Think about it for a second. If that boy hadn't stepped forward offering his 5 loaves and 2 fish, what would we be talking about today? There'd be no story. His willingness made it significant. And the heart of that young boy to say, even though it doesn't make sense that you could use this puny little lunch that I put together, here it is, here I am, use it. Friends, I'm here today to tell you that the more you get all you want, when you give what you have, you'll have more than what you want. Nothing will be wasted. There'll be stuff left over. How many would like your life to be in on that? You'd like to throw in your 5 loaves and 2 fishes to make a difference, because we can do that. We can do that. You're doing it locally here in the church. I know you're supporting missionaries, Mission Canada, Global Missions. I see it. I looked at your board today. It's a great board with great options for giving. Friends, I'm here to tell you today that if we're willing to take the treasure that's been entrusted to us and invest it in the kingdom, it'll bring value, increase the value of it. You say, well, how do we go about doing that? Well, you're already doing it, I know. You're already making a difference in the kingdom, and I'm thankful for that. But I'll give you some just specific thoughts, Erdo related, before I close this morning. Why does Millbrook as a church exist? Why does the church exist? It exists to see people come to Christ, does it not? You want it, like I don't know, when the last time was, and I'm sure it was recent, that you've had a baptismal service. As a pastor, and I was a pastor for 35 years, as a pastor, there's nothing more gratifying than to watch a baptismal service, to see people tell stories of life change. I mean, honestly, it's the most incredibly powerful event that can happen. You hear people that say, I once was lost, but now I'm found. I once was blind, but now I see. And I mean, Pastor, I learned that I didn't have to prepare a long sermon that day, because we just wanted to celebrate when I was pastoring those churches. So I know that's why your church exists too, to save and disciple people. I know that. Well, I also know it costs a lot of money to keep a church open. I mean, you have Pastor Mark's $220,000 a year salary, $150 for you, right? Yeah, so, I mean, it costs money to keep churches going. I get that, and obviously I'm joking about the price tag that I just mentioned. But I want you to know this, friends. For $41 a month, you can see someone come to Christ. You say, what are you talking about? Well, I've got in my hand 2 pictures of 2 kids. One of them is Immaculate Nyasha, and the other one's Axel Antonio. Okay? These are kids that are living, one in Zimbabwe, one in Honduras. I was talking, and you mentioned World Vision, I was talking with the former CEO of Compassion Canada, who is a PAOC credential holder. And he said, his name's Barry Slonwhite. Barry told me, he said, John, when we, at Compassion and at Erder, when kids come, and they will come, because the plus of Child Care Plus is that they come to the global workers to get their aid. So, we've got sponsored children, and they will come to the church because the missionary has their aid for them. They'll come, they'll participate. Guess what happens to them when they come and participate at church? They get saved. Barry said, John, what we found at Compassion, he said it'll be the same as true for Erdo. When one child gets saved, and they do, he said invariably they do, when one child gets saved, 4 additional family members will come and get saved as well. So he said, when you talk about sponsorship with people, they're not just providing nutrition and education and clothing and schooling. They're not just they're actually sponsoring a mini revival. So you are making a difference here in Millbrook, and I know and I want you, this is the best place that you can give. But if you find yourself with $41 a month extra, and you want to see 5 people come to Christ, talk to me at the table today. You know, I was born in Canada. I don't know how many you are. It doesn't matter if you were or weren't. I was born in Canada, and I know, how many know this is a wonderful nation to live in? We are blessed to live in this country, aren't we? Let me ask this question. How many think I had anything to do with where I was born? I can explain the biology of it afterwards, but I don't need to. I had nothing to do with being born in Canada. So I wasn't born in Canada because I'm excellent and I deserve to be blessed. I wasn't. It was the luck of where I was born. And I don't mean luck, but it was the chemistry and the biology of my parents lived in Ontario. I was born here. Well, I've got Axel Antonio and Immaculate Nyasha, Zimbabwe and Honduras, living in abject poverty. How many know they must have had something to do with being born in a bad country? They had nothing to do with it. We have been blessed immeasurably. They live in poverty. We're blessed not because we're wonderful. We're blessed to be a blessing. And I just would think that maybe one way you can see people come to Christ, which is what your church is all about, maybe you want to talk to me. If you've got some extra funds, I don't want to take 1 cent away from this church. But if you think, yeah, I could afford that, to see lives changed, I'd love to talk to you. You got to come back right away, I know, and so I'm going to invite you to come and get ready. Friends, I want to encourage you. I know corporately for years you've been seeing people come to Christ, and I thank you for that. But if you'd like to talk to me about joining God's mission somehow to support women that I talked about before, or to support some of these children, I'm going to be at my table afterwards. I will not push or prod or try to cajole you into doing it. But if you'd like to be interested in talking about that, I'd love to talk to you. Let me pray for you. Can I do that just before I close? And hopefully I'm close enough to 12 that you're okay. Lord, I thank you for the opportunity to be here today. Lord, this is a church that has long supported Erdo, and I thank you for them. Lord, I pray you continue to bless them. Lord, as the little boy gave all he had to meet the needs of the crowd around them, Lord, I know that is our desire. And Lord, this church is doing that. They are blessing this town, Lord, with the playground, with other opportunities, other things that are going on. I know great things are happening, and I pray for great blessing. I pray that greater things are yet to be done in this town. Lord, I pray today as we partner together, maybe with missions, maybe with Erdo, however it would be, Lord, that you would change lives, transform us. May we be part of your purpose and plan, I pray. In your name, amen. God bless you, friends. Thanks for listening today. I'll look forward to meeting you out there.